Final speech. United States and Russia. The US and Russia have long been rivals for superiority in the world. In the modern age, the United States has become the leading power. With this comes superior security. This is examined through physical, economic, and human security practices. I'll move on to slide 1. International and physical security. Starting with the geographic practices, the United States is in North America, as compared to Russia, which is in the Eurasian continent, split between both. Both have good geographic security, no concerns there, no issues. Then we move on to the political system. And the United States is a constitutional federal republic, meaning we have a constitution. It declares what we can and cannot do. Compared to Russia, which is a semi-presidential federation, meaning there are elected officials and non-elected officials, the president being elected while the prime minister is appointed, and having that split power in the executive branch. Now we move on to their power. Rotating power in the United States, it's pretty balanced. There's two main parties. Both have majorities at some times and have split numbers that are often very close in the legislature. At most times, compared to Russia, which has one-sided power for the most part, they have several political parties, but United Russia takes the cake on control, having 350 out of 450 seats in the legislature, and Putin controls this and has recently been elected to be president past his limited terms. So that is a real concern in the modern age, as that puts stress on the security of Russia, considering their political system is not rotating power, and any one person that causes corruption. Now to military spending. The U.S. is by far the highest spender, spending like $648 billion every year, and they examine both hard and soft power. The U.S. has the capability to use military force and economic power, being a leader in both, while Russia only uses hard power, as when they do have conflicts, it's only for their benefit. They're going to take whatever steps necessary, being oftentimes military, to get their point across. And the U.S. examines a lot more, shows a lot more diplomacy, being in a lot more organizations, while Russia has little diplomacy, sticking strictly to the hard power, not concerned with peaceful resolutions. It's whatever they want and when they want it. Now we'll move on to the next slide, where you have some images to exemplify that. The United Russia Party there next to the Democrat and Republican parties of the U.S. But we have a split, and while theirs is technically split, that is the dominating power. It doesn't really rotate at all as compared to our flip-flop at almost every election. And then for military spending, the U.S. spends $643.3 billion compared to Russia's $63.1 billion, so over 10 times as much, which is absolutely amazing. Next slide, we'll move on to economic security. And the economic system of the U.S. is free market capitalism. There are some limits to that and some assisting factors, such as unemployment and minimum wage requirements that must be met. But for almost everything else, the market determines it. The people can choose what they want to produce or not produce based on economic factors of profit. While in Russia, it's technically a mixed economy. However, the government owns the two main sources of income, being crude oil and natural gas, which makes up over 70% of their GDP, which already isn't very high. So, while it is mixed, the government controls the majority of anything that actually matters, and the rest is just left to the people. Now, free trade in the U.S. is much more prominent. So, an example is the USMCA, which allows free trade between the United States, Mexico, and Canada. That's a recent one by Donald Trump. And this free trade allows for better profits for all nations. It's a little bit more liberal than a hard power approach. While in Russia, they have no prominent free trade. The only thing they really export is the oil, and they don't have great relations with other nations. They don't. It's strictly about what they can do for themselves. And the United States has diverse production, extremely diverse, everything from agriculture to high-tech manufacturing. Um, while in Russia, the only two main things they're doing, as previously stated, are oil and natural gas. So they're much more limited to what they can actually produce. As far as the GDP, the U.S. is a leading world power, economic power, being first or second currently, depending on how China's sitting. The U.S. has $20.54 trillion GDP compared to Russia's $1.66 trillion, and these are from the World Bank. So, as you can see, almost over 10 times the amount. And Russia is a developing nation as compared to the U.S., who is developed and actually post-industrial. So, that makes it a lot more clear as to why they're more secure economically and why their GDP is so much higher. The U.S. also spends a lot more on immigration costs as for both legal and illegal immigrants. Um, that comes to healthcare, um, jobs, all that. There's very little immigration in Russia. They tend to shut it down. They make it very difficult for anyone to come in, and they protect the the Russian government protects uh, regular Russian citizens before it does anything for any outsider. And economic security threats for Russia would be decreasing oil prices, being that their the main part of their production and GDP. These current decreasing oil prices could cause a major shift in their economic security. And our biggest one in the United States is COVID-19. As it's seen all over the news, it's keeping people out of work, it's keeping production down, costs are going up. So that is currently hurting the U.S. and the world economy. We'll move on to the next slide for some examples. As you can see, oil production and gas production in Russia is currently up. It does take periodic dives around the summer of every year. Just an example of those other two main. And then you can see over here in the chart that the United States, it says 20.49 trillion, which is close to the other number, and compared to Russia's 4, which this actually puts them closer together. But an example of how much bigger the U.S. economy really is, and when you can see it in the chart. And then we can move on here to the next slide, human security. One of the main things in human security is disease control. Currently, the U.S. is dealing with COVID-19 just like the rest of the world, Russia as well. Russia not near to the extent the U.S. is, but in the U.S., they're putting out, mandatory lockdowns in some states, trying to curb this the best degree they can, putting out funding for research and for stimulus to try and boost the economy and combat the effects of this. And Russia also is working to this to some degree. They don't have near the amount of cases, but they're trying to curb it as well with similar things as far as lockdowns and stay-at-home orders. And they also have HIV issues, which they're currently dealing with. And next we'll move on to civil rights. Civil and human rights are very prominent in the U.S., all the way back to the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, and then on to the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Limited rights in Russia, prominent censorship, very LGBT, very censored, other religions, other political parties, very censored. Ideas that go against the government are censored. Environmental protection is more prominent in the U.S. The EPA, is the Environmental Protection Agency set by the federal government, which regulates environmental issues. Russia, poor environmental regulation. Contamination is prominent, especially with the oil and gas industries. They leak. They're not well regulated, not well kept. They're more concerned with just producing. And one of the biggest threats to human security in the U.S. is drugs, both being funneled in domestically and from Mexico. These are prominent issues that are very common, regardless of how they get there. Combating it is the goal. And disease is the biggest problem in Russia, said HIV and drugs as well. And I will move on to the images after this. And life expectancy in Russia is much lower than the U.S., as previously stated, and showing that That's because they're a second world nation as compared to the U.S. was a third world nation, or first world nation, not third world. My bad. And the Civil Rights Act of 1964, and the Bill of Rights examples there of prominent U.S. civil rights. So in conclusion, the U.S. is superior in security in all three areas: physical, economic, and human. Thank you.